Why presentations suck and what to do about it. How many times have you sat through a presentation where the presenter read every word on the screen? Better yet, how many times have you read every word and bullet point from your own presentation? I know I have. We've all done it, reading every word on the screen during a presentation. This isn't an efficient way of presenting and could actually be detrimental to learning. Presentations aren't supposed to be a that is read. They are intended to be an outline of your material. There are lots of reasons why presentations lack pizzazz. What we can do is explore how to overcome having a presentation that sucks. This presentation will cover some best practices, which are based upon research of several different multimedia principles. Strong images can help illustrate your point. However, including photos just because we like them might actually be a detriment to your lesson and the learning, unless you are presenting about safety in a wildlife park. This presentation references several multimedia principles from e-learning and the science of instruction by Clark and Mayer. So you will see as we go through in the design part of this, different principles which I'll talk about. So think about what elements in a presentation do you find engaging. Feel free to pause this video for just a second and write down a few things that you can think of. And also think about what elements in a presentation do you find distracting. Feel free to pause again and write down a few things. And this could be either online or face-to-face. One thing to keep in mind is that technology should always be used to meet a specific instructional need. This quote comes from Larson and Lockey in the Streamlined ID, a practical guide to instructional design. What are some of the reasons why we give presentations? There are three primary reasons really in a class. Students are bombarded with information in multiple classes, but if you can help emphasize key elements in a lesson, you can aid student learning and retention of the material. Another reason might be to outline steps in a process or clarify material students are struggling with. And last but not least, don't overlook a chance to create a lasting impact. You are a subject matter expert in your area for a reason. Pass on your passion to your students with memorable lessons. So you might start thinking about a presentation blueprint before you jump into the tool you want to use. And here are some key points to consider. Your audience, who are they? Your message, what is it you're going to say? And your strategy, how am I going to develop one? In a classroom, a presentation is really an instructional lesson, and our audience are really the learners. So keeping that in mind, we need to take into consideration prior knowledge of the learner, the learning context, and transfer of knowledge by the learner. Also take into consideration a face-to-face setting versus online. Remember, for your students, it is all about the takeaway. Oftentimes our message is the delivery of bullet point after bullet point of material, and the message shouldn't be putting every word on the screen. Keep in mind lesson objectives and what you want your students to know or be able to do at the end of the lesson. Remember also the key points to emphasize, and do so by telling a story. As I mentioned, you're a subject matter expert for a reason. You chose the topic that you're teaching because you have a passion about it. So pass on that passion. Share your own experiences in your learning in college and through your career, and make it memorable for your students. As you start thinking about your strategy, here are some questions to ask yourself. How will you deliver your presentation? Now's the time to start thinking about maybe the tool that you're going to use. How are you going to build in learner engagement? And what assessment opportunities are you going to provide to make sure your students are learning what they need to from your lessons? For this part of the presentation, we move into the design phase. And so using only essential text in the presentation is one of the multimedia principles mentioned by Clark and Mayer. This one is the coherence principle. Eliminate any extraneous text, graphics, or even audio. Anything that isn't necessary can impede the learning process. The segmenting principle is keeping each slide to one main point. So manage complex material by breaking it into parts and break a continuous lesson into bite-sized segments. So segment or chunk your material as best you can. For the multimedia principle, you want to think about using words and graphics instead of words alone. So in this case, you don't want to have a slide full of bullet points, but incorporate some graphics as best you can. And the reason for doing this is for the act of processing, it's important to make pictorial and verbal connections with the material. So you might think about static visuals for explaining processes and animated or video presentations for hands-on procedures. Also, remember to keep your images and text closely aligned so it all makes sense. Best practice, and also known in graphic design, is keeping typography and design elements consistent. So it's often referred to as CARP: contrast, alignment, repetition, and proximity. The modality and personalization principles emphasize the importance of providing narration for presentations in e-learning. This is an often overlooked but extremely important aspect of online instruction. It not only provides context for the material, but it also helps with the cognitive process by separating visual, and auditory processing. The personalization principle goes one step further and talks about how when you narrate with a more casual tone and less formal, that the students can make greater connections than if you're rigid and stiff and formal with your narration. Don't forget your learners. Provide opportunities for learner engagement. Assess learning by using some audience polling devices. For face-to-face classes on any of Schemeketa's campuses, you can check out clickers from the library. They're an audience response polling system that includes a base station that plugs into any computer and a set of student clickers. This allows you to easily assess your learners in a real-time scenario, so you can move forward in a lesson or back up and review material. For online courses, you can use a web-based polling system like Poll Everywhere. In Poll Everywhere, you can make a poll accessible from a computer and a mobile device, and you can easily integrate your polls into Google Slides or PowerPoint presentations. As with anything, prior planning is essential to creating, designing, and delivering a presentation. So remember this as you self-evaluate your presentation. Don't leave anything to chance. And then ask yourself, does the presentation elicit engagement by the participant? Maybe even have someone else review it and give some feedback. And also check to see, is the presentation well organized and free of any of the non-essential material? Here's some final thoughts as you begin your design work. Chunk your material. Remember the segmenting principle. Keep your lessons into bite-size and small amounts. And also keep similar themed items together to deliver an organized and consistent presentation. Relate the material and tell a story. Don't just list fact after fact. This will help build that lasting impact and work towards leaving your learners wanting more, as opposed to tuning out too soon.